I would like to introduce one of the top hackers on HackerOne, coming from Sweden. This is Frans Rosén, so let's give him a big round of applause.
Thank you very much. All right, I will talk a little bit about how I actually approach a target. And target meaning a company or something that starts a bug bounty program or whatever. If you want to help your friend out building a website, this is how I get started. So I work for a company called Thirdparty, and we try to automate the stuff that I do. So as soon as I find vulnerabilities or security issues with companies, I try to figure out a way to actually do that automatically on a bunch of other companies also. So I'm talking and creating a robot out of the stuff that I actually look for. And I've been doing HackerOne since it started. I think I'm #1 right now. I always had this picture, I love having this picture because everybody thinks I'm dressed as a ninja. But I'm not, it's super cold in Sweden, -35 or something. So you can see my eyebrows are full of ice. So I call myself the Swedish ninja because I like it. I started a couple of years ago when a company sent out an email, and PayPal was that company. And they actually sent me an email and they said, we're going to pay you money if you find a security issue in our company or on our websites. And that got me curious. I've never hacked or anything. I'm a programmer from the start. So I program a lot, but when I saw this email, I got curious. So I started registering an account at PayPal. I registered a merchant account, which is for companies. And I started sending $1 between them and sending messages and stuff and trying to see if I could screw with it. And suddenly I find an issue with it. I was able to actually make stuff happen to a company. If you were sending money to a company, that company could potentially leak all their money to me. So they could start sending money without them actually knowing. So that was a bad one. So I sent the email. I made some screenshots. I showed them how I did it. And I explained this is how I did, this is how I register on a merchant account, this is what I sent. And I waited. And back in those days, it took a lot of time. It took 2 months or something. And I get an email back. And it says, yeah, Frans, this is actually a vulnerability. And we want to send you $750. And I was like, this is an email you throw away. That's spam, right? Somebody wants my email, want to send me money. I'm like, hell no, I'm not doing that. So, but I realized later that that was actually valid. So they actually wanted to pay me money because of that bug. And during the time, there was a bunch of other companies doing the same thing, basically allowing anybody to hack them. Not all of them actually paid in money, but they paid in t-shirts and stuff. So I freaked out. I started hacking all these companies. Because I was like, I need to see if I can actually find vulnerabilities on these companies. And it turned out I actually could. I've never had so many t-shirts in my life as back in those days. I had so many t-shirts. It went a bit too far. I went to vacation with my girlfriend to Thailand. And when you go to a vacation with your girlfriend, you don't bring your laptop. That's a rule, you don't do that. And I read on Twitter on my iPhone that one of these companies starting a bug bounty program, and they're going to pay out money. And I was super excited, but I didn't have any computer with me. So I used my phone, and I found some bookmarklets that made it possible for me to view the source code on the website. So I sent them, I spent a night in Thailand. That's how I spent my vacation. I spent a night sending them screenshots from my iPhone with security vulnerabilities. I sent them 22 emails that night. And I went to bed and woke up in the evening in Thailand, and I had 2 emails with $4,000. And when I got this, I realized this is big. Because not only did I report it to them, they actually patched it during the night and then sent me the money the day after they patched it. So everybody won. I had an awesome time in Thailand, and also this company actually patched the issues. But it was really weird sending iPhone screenshots from Thailand. So when I actually go to a new program or target that's starting, because now it's much easier when you have these marketplaces like HackerOne, it's much easier to actually get going and get started. So what I do when I approach a target, let's see, like that, is actually to look for certain things that I know will possibly be vulnerable. And one of those things are basically flash files. Flash files, like SWF, they are the worst. Like, they're the plague of internet. Because as soon as you have flash files, you probably know for certain that those files will be vulnerable. And everybody's trying to mitigate that, like we should eliminate flash completely. But it has taken so much time, so we're totally not there yet. So there's a bunch of flash files, like all of these ones. Like, they're vulnerable per design. So if any company has these files, you know for certain that they are actually vulnerable to a bunch of stuff. Actually, one bug that I reported today was due to one flash file being used and then used a bit more. But that was one of the starting points to actually use that flash file. So it happens all the time still. Another thing that I tend to look at is how to validate URLs. And validate URLs, what does that mean? And one example of this is when, for example, looking at something called an open redirect. I'll try to explain what that is later. But the principle about that is that one company allows you to send you as a customer to somewhere else. And by doing that, they want to know where they're going to send the users. And URL validation is something that they use to actually validate that you're not leaving their website, that you're actually redirected to somewhere else but still under that company. So, and URL validation is super hard because everybody's doing it differently. And by looking at how different programming languages are doing it, you can see that there's a bunch of differences going on in this. This is a bit technical, but I'll try to explain. So, if you have a URL that looks like this, looks super weird. But the thing is, when you have an @ sign in the URL, that means that the stuff before is actually user and password data. It's called a user credential path or user credential part of the URL. So that means that if you're using this URL and you use it in Java, for example, Java will think that the domain of this URL is actually x.com. And also if you do with PHP and you say, ask it what host is this? What domain is this? And they will say x.com. But if you try it in Chrome and use this, it will say y.com. And you might understand that this actually results in a bunch of issues. And one of these examples, this clicker is weird. So here's a bunch of examples, real life examples of those open redirects. And open redirects is basically not that severe, but it's a perfect thing to chain with other stuff. To actually, for example, take over, if they have a sign-in with Facebook, for example, you can actually use that open redirect to get their token. I'll not go into detail about exactly that vulnerability. It's just that open redirects, as soon as you see a company that tries to prevent you from redirect out of that domain, that could be an indication that they know that they actually are trying to prevent it for a reason. And there's so many bypasses to this issue that there's always fun to actually poke at them. Because when you realize that this company is trying to prevent me to redirect somewhere, I wonder why. And then you start looking why are they trying to prevent that? And then you can use that bypass to actually do something else. Another thing I tend to look at is, seriously, is third-party scripts. So third-party scripts is basically, let's say you have a web shop. And you want to track how many people are getting into your web shop by doing a Google search, for example. So by doing a Google, but what they do is that they use a third party that solves that for them. The only thing that they need to do is to place a little JavaScript on their website, and this JavaScript will track if the user came from Google, if the user came from somewhere else, and from a Google ad or whatever. And those third-party scripts are super interesting because some of them do not care about security. And when you use a JavaScript from a third party on your website, that's basically you give the control over to the third party to do whatever they want. And it turns out that a bunch of these third parties actually are doing whatever they want with a bunch of issues. So here's two examples of third-party scripts that's actually doing something really bad. And what they did was that they were actually listening to stuff in the URL to load JavaScript again from somewhere else, and you were able to control that part. So that means that you go to a web shop, that web shop uses a third party, and that third party listens to the URL and looks for, in this case, like report URL and KXSRC. And if they find that, they will load the JavaScript from that domain. Then you use your own domain and say, I want to load the JavaScript from my domain. And suddenly you can control whatever you want. You can run an XSS on that site. And this happens a lot. And I did a talk about this a year ago. And I showed some examples of companies that actually had this issue. One company that I won't mention, but they were actually like, oh shit, we did not know about this. We did not know that this third party was actually affecting us with this issue. And what was funny was that another guy actually found the exact same thing on Uber. So he found out that if you had this URL parameter, KXSRC, you could select whatever domain you wanted to actually load the JavaScript. And he was able to run an XSS on Uber. And I think he got $7,000 for that, which is awesome. So this is like high impact things. If you're able to actually watch those third-party scripts, you can actually find some really good things, because not all people are looking there. Another thing that I tend to look for is something that we actually posted a blog from Detectify. We posted a blog a couple of years ago. And we noticed, for example, let's say you're a company, and this company, we will run a campaign. We will do an event of some sort. And this event we will run on a subdomain of our company. Let's say we will use campaign.site.com. And we heard about Heroku. Heroku is awesome to host apps. You can like run an app on Heroku, like super simple. So you point campaign.site.com to Heroku and you run your campaign. And it's super awesome. It works perfectly. The problem is that when you stop your campaign, you don't want to pay for Heroku anymore. So you remove Heroku. But you don't remove the campaign.site.com pointing to Heroku. So what happens then when Heroku doesn't have this campaign anymore, someone else can go in and like, oh, that's my domain. I want that domain. And Heroku will just like, all right, that's fine. That's cool. And you can place whatever you want on that domain because of this. And this happens with so many services, like Heroku, AWS. There's like a bunch of these companies. GitHub is also doing it. Like, there's so many companies that doesn't care about which user is having the domain. And that's a problem, and that's something that I want to highlight, because it affects so many companies. When we told the service providers, when we told Heroku, they were like, yeah, we know, it's bad. But they don't use us anymore, so what can we do about it? When we talked with the companies that actually was affected by the issue, they threw money at us, for real. They paid out so much money because it was so high impact for them. Because there's no reason, like, if somebody goes to campaign.site.com, there's no way they can actually see that that's not the company. They wouldn't be able to verify it even. They couldn't. So when we saw this, we thought like, hey, let's automate this. This is perfectly a case for automation. And we did that. So I just made a short proof of concept just to see if it worked. And I started getting some really fun data out of that automation, because I was collecting all the bug bounty programs and trying to collect all that data. And one day, actually, I got one ping from a company that you might know about. And it said, Facebook.com has a domain that is now possible to take over. And I was like, what? Seriously? Are they using WordPress? That's super interesting. In WordPress, it turns out you can have an enterprise version of WordPress using WordPress.com. And going to this website, I saw this, there's no domain here. I can't map this domain to any account. This is, I don't know what to do with this domain. And I went into WordPress and I added it to my cart and I had to pay $13. And then I could use it. It was actually a bit more advanced, because WordPress.com had a vulnerability that you had to abuse to actually get this. So I had to brute force a bunch of IDs to actually find their ID to take it over. So it was a bit messy, but I told Facebook okay, so the scenario is this. You're vulnerable to this. I just need to find the ID that is affecting you, and then I will take it over. The problem is that I have 40 million IDs to look for, and it will take some time, but I'll get there. And they actually responded to me like, yeah, you don't need to do that. We're gonna pay you $5,000, which was awesome. And I actually donated those money to an event that starts tomorrow called B-Sides. So that happens to double the reward. And B-Sides got $10,000, which was awesome. Any questions? Is there any question, by the way? Yeah, so B-Sides is a security event that is like held all over the world. And they're going to be in San Francisco tomorrow and on Monday, I think. And also in Vegas before every DEF CON. So I will actually jump so I don't waste more time doing this, but I will go to my white horse. This is a guy with a horse. I'll end this with an example of another bug that is like really not technical, but also talks a little bit about what Justin just mentioned. And a couple of years ago, there was a girl named Runa Sandvik that posted that people were searching for credentials on GitHub to actually mine a bunch of Bitcoins. And this was a huge problem, and Amazon realized that they had to look for them themselves and then close down those user and passwords and credentials to prevent people from mining Bitcoins on other people's computers. And when I saw this, I was like, okay, so let's use this, but instead of like going broad, let's do like Justin mentioned, like let's target a company and look specifically for a company's employees and look for their passwords and credentials. And it turned out it was like really effective. Like it actually works. What Justin mentioned and the tools he mentioned actually works. So here's an example of a company that had some credentials in their code, which actually worked. Another example was Groupon that had a Salesforce login. And Salesforce is like a customer relation matter, like a CRM. What's it called? What does it mean? CRM. Yeah, customer relation. Yeah, content. Yeah, okay. So what it does is like it stores all your data about all your sales, about all your customers, all your employees, and you can do like everything in this thing. So it's super sensitive to get access to a Salesforce. And when I saw these credentials, and Groupon actually have a responsible disclosure, I tried them, and it prompted me with like, hey, would you mind changing your password to something else? So this actually worked. They still had that password active when I saw it. And like a version manager works like this, like you remove stuff and you delete stuff. And this is how it looks, seriously. And this is a good example of someone that doesn't really know how version control works. So they had credentials in the version control and then realized, hey, we shouldn't have those. So they removed it and replaced it by XXX instead. But you can, in a version control on GitHub, you can just go back in the code and see what happened. So you just go back and you see their access keys, and they still worked. And another meta was like GitHub having Salesforce logging on GitHub, which was fun. I hope it was like fake, but it wasn't. I don't know. And lastly, I did this with a company. And when I did this with one of the companies on HackerOne actually, I noticed that I found a login, user and password for Salesforce. And I used those credentials because I knew the CISO of this company. And when doing this, I actually got in. I got into Salesforce, and I started seeing a bunch of dashboards that was like really bad to see. Like I saw their sales, I saw their employees, I saw everything. So I was like really scared. And this was a Friday night at 2:30 a.m. And I was like, okay, I send an email. I need to send an email and tell them about it. So I send an email and like, I hope you're great. You need to like see this urgently. And I get back like, yeah, what number can I reach you at? And he calls me, and he says like, yeah, what's up? And I'm like, yeah, so I have this login for Salesforce. And I can see like everything, and the user is called like ConsoleBot. And this is super bad. And like silence in the phone. And then, like, send the report, I'll get back to you. Click. And I was like, what the hell? What happened? What happened? And I waited a couple of days, and suddenly I get an email back. Like, thank you for finding that. Here's $30,000. Which was crazy. But that was like impact-based. Like, that was the worst thing that could happen to them. That's it. Sorry for taking too much time here. Thank you very much.
But I want to hand over the microphone to a big friend of HackerOne and someone who's going to teach you a lot. This is Peter Yaworski.
So bear with me for a second on my handshake and I try to get this up on the screen. Okay, great. So thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to chat with you. In hindsight, maybe I should have gone before Frans, because I think my talk might be a little bit less interesting than his. But hopefully you'll learn from it as well. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different track. I'll talk about kind of how I got started, how I learned, and hopefully share a lot of the pain points that I had so that you avoid those and you have a better road than I did starting out. So, just in terms of who I am, I'm at Yaworski on HackerOne, Twitter, pretty much everywhere, so feel free to reach out to me. It's been about 14 months since I started doing bug bounties. I've got thanks from 28 different programs. I found about 154 bugs on HackerOne. Hopefully that's 155 as of today. I'm 36, and then in terms of where I'm coming from, my formal education is not in hacking, bug bounties, or anything like that. I actually went to school in public policy, so working for the government. Self-taught developer, working for the government is pretty boring, so I started trying to figure out how to program. And then from there, as I was learning, I thought, why don't I start writing this book and sharing with others in terms of how I'm learning, what I'm doing. It helps me, but it also helps other people. And then I've also gone on to record interviews with different hackers, Frans being one of them, among many others. So those are two learning resources that I promote because I create them. So in terms of my talk, what we'll do is we'll go through some lessons learned. Really, these are kind of chronological in that they build on each other. So first and foremost, when I started out, I came across the activity on HackerOne, and it's a list of all these vulnerabilities and how much people are making. And I immediately thought, wow, this is amazing. I'm going to be a millionaire in no time. This looks super easy. That's definitely not the case. I learned that pretty quickly. It takes a lot of effort to do what everybody is doing all around us today. So just in terms of examples, I've got Patrick Fehrenbach here, IT security guard. So Patrick's found vulnerabilities from Uber, Google, Yahoo, Snapchat, Apple, some big names. But when he was starting out, his first 7 bugs on PayPal, all duplicates. So he gets no money. Found bugs, doesn't get anything for him, anything for his effort. But he kept going, and then he found everything else. File descriptor, a friend of mine in China, he's gone on to make 200K from Twitter. Just Twitter. Twitter's a program that everybody is hacking on, and he's gone on and done this himself while everyone else has been doing it and made $200,000. But in talking with him, he started out with non-applicables. So non-applicables are you submit a bug and the company says, yeah, you're wrong. So here's -5 from your reputation and come back later. So he thought about giving up, but he kept sticking with it. So Ben Siddiqui, he's here today as well. So in chatting with him, last year he was feeling burnt out and thought about giving up. But right now, I think he's listed 17th on HackerOne, made $7,000 today from Airbnb, and he's got thanks from Yelp, Shopify, Apple, Uber, Yahoo. So I flag all those to say there's opportunity. You just got to stick through it. You got to power through the lulls, and you'll be successful. So in terms of my experience, I was reading some examples from people who found bugs, and one of them was this XSS from Yahoo. So it paid $10,000. And so they had this payload, and it looked interesting, so I thought, oh, I'll go try that on Shopify. Their minimum payout is $500. So I did that, and immediately, you can see I get this nice alert box, which is bad. You don't want that. So I thought, this is great. Minimum, I'm going to get $500. Within 2 minutes, no, you're not going to get $500. You didn't read the fact that we don't want that. We know that that happens. Don't report it to us. So that was kind of discouraging. But I stuck with it. And so I kept going after HackerOne because I had the book. They had purchased the book from me, and I wanted to prove that, lack of a better term, I wasn't a dummy. So I kept going after their site, and this was the first time that I found a bug. They validated it, they gave me $500 for it. But it took me about 2 months to find that first bug and get paid for it. So from there, what I learned is that you really have to provide for the companies evidence that you actually have found a bug. Here's how I can exploit this to do something malicious against your site. And so, when I was doing that, I was reading all these reports where people would say, here's a bug, you can go read about what this is at this link, this link, this link. So I started doing that. And in hindsight, it was a terrible idea. So I did that with HackerOne, and Dirk, one of their programmers, actually worked through it with me. And so he said, you know what, go ahead, try to exploit this, try to figure it out. So I did that for about a week, 2 weeks, and then we came to the conclusion that, no, you can't exploit this. So for me, that was a learning opportunity because I can't put my work on somebody else. I can't tell a company, I think this is vulnerable, you go check it out and let me know, pay me if that's the case. It doesn't work that way. And when you can provide a company evidence that there's an actual vulnerability and explain it, then they'll be much more receptive. And sometimes they won't think it's a vulnerability, but when you provide that explanation, they'll think, oh, you know what, maybe we shouldn't have programmed it that way. You're right, it does have this unintended consequence. Here's some money for it. So from there, when I was making all these mistakes, what I didn't realize or I didn't appreciate is the fact that there's this whole reputation system that's around bug bounties. So as you submit valid bugs, your reputation rises. But then there's also this signal. Signal's the idea that for every bug that you submit that's valid versus invalid, you'll get this rating, which tells the company, hey, this guy is legitimate versus this guy is not legitimate. So by me going out and submitting all these vulnerabilities and not really paying attention to that, my signal plummeted. And so the reason why that's key is because when you have a high reputation, companies want to work with you. And they want to work with you before they let everybody else work with you. And that's valid and valuable because then there's less people competing with you for the money. So if you're in a private program and someone's paying you and you're only competing against 10 hackers versus 10,000 hackers, there's more of a possibility that you're going to make money from that program. So this really hit home for me when I was looking at this company called Moneybird. And Moneybird had this threshold where you had to have a signal of 1 to report to them. So I had like 1.01, and I reported a bug to another company, and they said, no, you're wrong. And so that dropped my signal down to 0.99. Moneybird had a threshold that said you have to have a signal of 1. And so I found this bug, I knew I was going to get paid, but I couldn't submit to them for a full month. I reached out to them on Twitter and I said, hey, I have this bug, I know it's valid, can I submit it to you? I'm just below your threshold. And they said, no, wait for 30 days. So I got lucky, I waited the 30 days, I submitted it. It was $100, but it was still one of my first bounties. So it's first paycheck for me, so it was awesome to get, but I almost missed out on it because of the fact that I made so much noise for companies. So again, really pay attention to your reputation when you're doing this. The next thing that comes up in terms of my learning was how much hacking is about skills, observation, and relationships. So I get a lot of people that ask me, how do you do this, what do you do? And I always tell them that. You start trying to get a feeling for an understanding of what does feel right and what doesn't feel right. And it really comes with practice. So you start looking for things, and then the skill kicks in to realize, how do I actually go and exploit this? So I was working on a site, and they were using AngularJS. And so a lot of times with AngularJS, you can end up getting cross-site scripting because developers don't really appreciate kind of sandbox escapes and how Google protects you when you use AngularJS. So I started putting in all these payloads trying to get that, and what ended up happening was I got this email, and you can see I've got this error that's coming from the site. And what it's telling me is that it doesn't understand this tag that's putting in 7 times 7. I was trying to get 49 to see if there was a vulnerability there, because then it's evaluating my math. But by getting this, it was telling me that there's a template error. It doesn't understand what I'm trying to do. So That to me was the observation piece, and then the skill piece kicks in that I've read some blog posts where people are talking about this, and they say go to the documentation for Smarty. And you can see Smarties listed here. And when you read the documentation for Smarty, what they tell you is you are able to inject commands into Smarty template. So I can run any code that I wanted on this server, and I could potentially take over the server. So that's the best type of vulnerability you can find. Now, when I did that, I knew this program didn't pay a lot of money. So I think their top payout was about $150 at the time. And they gave me something like $200 or $250, which was fair. I knew I wasn't going to get a lot of money. But at the same time, I thought, I can take over your entire site, your entire server. $200 doesn't seem really fair compared to what you've already done. So I asked them, is there any way that we could bump up that bounty? Comparative to what it was, I thought my expectation was it was going to be a little bit higher. And they wrote back and they said, you know what, you're right. Here's a bonus of $150. So then my bounty was $400, right? So it's not a huge win, but that's where it comes down to relationships, where you're polite to people, you talk with people, you work with a company, and it doesn't even have to be a company, it could be hackers. You talk to others, you work with others, and you develop these relationships, and it goes a long way. It doesn't always work out that way. In contrast, here's an observation, and I tried to take out all of the inappropriate language where this is not the type of relationship you want to develop and have. And the reason why I point this out is because the reference to taxi driver here has become infamous in bug bounties. You'll see it everywhere when you start participating in the community, because this person went the complete opposite way. There was a decision they didn't like, so they started swearing at the company, and then ended it with taxi driver, which is shown up everywhere. My last example for that, in terms of relationships, so annually there's this big conference called DEF CON in Las Vegas. You may have heard about it. I'm from Canada, so for me to go to DEF CON, it would cost me, $1,000, $2,000. I was working on a program, and they've told me that I can disclose this. So I was working on Salesforce, and I submitted some bugs to them, and I reached out because I wasn't sure if another bug would be considered. And in doing that, they asked me, am I going to be at Salesforce, or am I going to be at DEF CON? And I said I wasn't. I didn't think I was going to be able to go. And so they said, you know what, we'll fly you out there. We'll fly you out, we'll put you up in the hotel, you can come, we'll pay for everything. And it's really because we want to support you. You've done good work on our program. We can recognize the potential in you, and so here's an opportunity to take it further. And that was all based on relationship. It was because I had done the work for them, I had submitted valid bugs, and where I had missed the mark, I had apologized, and I told them, next time I won't do that. I'll take it that step further. I'll provide you that proof of concept. And so that's where relationships really come in big. The last piece, and this is kind of what I talked about in terms of the community, is the idea of paying it forward. So one of the things I mentioned is I do these interviews with different hackers, and we sit down, and we usually do it through Skype when I record it and I put it up on YouTube, and we walk through how did you start, where do you learn, what have you found, what can you really tell us that will help other hackers get learned. And so I think now I've done 10 interviews, coming up on 11. And these are all people like Frans who donated at least an hour, hour and a half of their time to walk through and share their knowledge with everybody else. And so it's the same thing with the book. When you're part of bug bounties and you get into the community, it really is just that. It's a community. So when you help other people, it ends up coming back to you in full circle. And so I leave it here in terms of paying it forward, because you'll be starting out now, but a year or 2 years down the road, someone's going to ask you for help. They're going to be in the same position that you are now. Help them out. It's the right thing to do, and it just ends up, the more people that are hacking, the more companies are going to come on board, the more legitimate it's going to be, and the more opportunity there's going to be for everybody. It really is an ecosystem where hackers need companies, companies need hackers. We all need platforms like HackerOne to help sustain that and develop that and create that bridge between the two. So in terms of getting started, these are really some icons of the tools that I use. Some I don't, but Portswigger is probably, they develop what's called burp. It's a proxy. Proxy being when you request something from the internet, you can see the information that your browser sends and when it gets back, and you can play with that. So that's probably the #1 tool you want to check out. These other ones in the middle are really for reconnaissance. So trying to find information, trying to find stuff you shouldn't be able to find. Like sublister helps you find subdomains. Nmap will look at kind of ports around servers. And then lastly, on the right are some specific tools. So Wappalizer, that's the one that I was talking about where I was looking for the Angular injections. Wappalizer is the one that told me the site was using Angular. XSS Hunter is a cross-site scripting tool that will find cross-site scripting where you can't see it. It will let you know when an administrator happens to execute that. Next, in terms of getting started, when you're doing this, always read the scopes. Scopes kind of give you a good clue in terms of what the program you're going to be working with is like. So here's an example of a scope that I'm not too keen on. This is it. It doesn't really tell you kind of what you're expecting, what the relationship's going to be. And unsurprisingly, I had a bad experience working with this company. And in hindsight, it's pretty clear because they don't really tell you what to expect in terms of money or what they're looking for, anything like that. When you compare that to a company like Uber, this is Uber's scope where I can't actually put it on the screen for you so that you can read it. They are insanely specific. They tell you what they want, how much they're going to pay, what they know about, what they don't want, and it's fully clear to you what type of relationship you're going to have when you work with them. So this is a good example when you're getting started of where you want to spend your time versus where you don't want to spend your time. Reports, right? We talked about kind of the proof of concept. Your report is going to be your interaction with the company. HackerOne has a great blog post in terms of how to do this from Adam Backus. So it's really, how do the reports work? Definitely want to check this out because this will help you develop that relationship with the company. That relationship will only help you in a variety of different circumstances, right? From the bounties, but also if there's potential to leverage that relationship for something further. Sometimes employment. That's pretty much it.